The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Walking Dead, Reviving Your Talent Networks. My name is Kara Lucas, and I will be your moderator for today's show. So I'm going to go through a few housekeeping notes on the screen today before we get started. I know a lot of you are probably still working on getting your audio set up, so we'll give you a couple minutes if you need them to reference the graphic on the screen now. If you are new to FOT broadcasts, our webinars are very interactive, and we encourage you to get involved in the show in a couple of different ways. So the first way is to submit your questions throughout the presentation to our questions box, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. The other way we'd like you to participate is on Twitter using the hashtag SmashFly. SmashFly is our sponsor for today, and we'll get to them a little later. So without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our presenters for today's webinar. All right, here we go. All right, our presenters today. I'm gonna go Tim first and switch it up. So our first presenter is Mr. Tim Sackett, leading the show today. Tim is president at HRU Technical Resources out of Lansing, Michigan. He's also blogger #1 and owner at the Tim Sackett Project, as well as quote, I'm quoting this, world's foremost expert on workplace hugging. Tim.
Doesn't that sound so creepy? Like I try to come up with the creepiest title ever, and I'm like, the world's workplace hugging. Isn't that wrong on so many levels?
You're an HR pro, so you have the right to say that. I'm sending you a virtual hug right now, by the way.
Awesome.
All right, our second presenter today is Mr. Chris Dunn. Chris is a CHRO at Kinetics, an RPO and recruiting firm out of Atlanta. He's also founder of the blogs Fistful of Talent and the HR Capitalist. Last, but certainly not least, he is a self-proclaimed hoops junkie. Chris, welcome.
I'm here, and I'm also the world's foremost expert on questioning people that consider themselves hugging experts.
Well, it sounds like
there's something about that.
Yeah. Well,
but that's okay. Hey, Kara.
All right.
Thanks for the great intro. You did that well.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, Chris. All right, I'm gonna let the dynamic duo take it from here. Go ahead, Tim, Chris.
Thanks, Kara. Hey, everybody, real quick too on the hashtag, if you want to hit us on the Twitters today, hashtag SmashFly, and we obviously love the folks over there for sponsoring today's webinar. There's all the logos. Chris, obviously, a Fistful of Talent, Kinetics, in the HR Capitalist. That's how I found my good friend, Mr. Dunn, was on his little website over there, the HR Capitalist. I'm also a writer over at Fistful of Talent. I work every single day in my office at HRU Technical Resources. And the aptly named Tim Sackett Project, which contractually I'm obliged to let Chris know that he helped me make that title there. So
That's right, Tim. Never forget it. I held a focus group to name your blog, and I'm proud of it.
The project is still going. I do get a lot of comments. I can't believe how many people say, "Oh, I should do like the Mike Smith project," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, but I've already gotten it, so now you're going to steal it."
You're already in that space.
Yeah, so again, check out the people over at SmashFly, recruitment marketing automation at its finest, and they're also a sponsor of Fistful of Talent, and we're glad to have them because we love their technology. Chris, I want to get right into it.
Let's get into it. Who are these people, Tim?
I'm a huge fan of The Walking Dead. I know you're not necessarily a watcher like I am. My wife Kim and I binge watched like the first 4 seasons. It's on Netflix, and then last year started watching live, and I actually hate myself for it because I only want to watch series now that actually are completely finished, because now I find myself like a normal person having to watch TV on Sunday night to catch The Walking Dead.
Right, and you want to consume a bunch at the same time. I get it.
Yeah, so I wanted to introduce everybody to my favorite character, which is Michonne, right? So, Chris, you don't know this about Michonne, but she's got a couple of zombies there on a leash, and she figured out if you cut their arms off and their mouths off, and you just like let them, lead them around like dogs, all the other zombies will leave you alone. For whatever reason, she's the only one in the entire show that does this. Nobody else does this, but she did it. It's kind of creepy, but I think it's completely awesome. Now, I made this presentation a week ago, or probably 2 weeks ago, and little did we know that my favorite character and then the lead character of the entire show, Rick, who is this guy, the white guy, not the black guy, in the front of that slide. Rick and Michonne hooked up, so now we have Michonne in The Walking Dead. Can you believe it?
So this lady's name is Rochon?
Michonne, but they know
Michonne.
Like Jennifer and Ben and made it.
I got it. So Michonne, like just this picture reminds me she could be a great HR manager. I think she's got it under control.
Yeah. Well, she has a sword, like a ninja sword that she just chops off zombie heads with. So she's completely awesome. Anyways, so why are we talking about zombies, right? This is what it all comes back to. And when we started talking with SmashFly and said, hey, we want to talk about talent networks, and we started really talking about that whole concept of why do you want a talent network, and the reality was it was because we have all these people that are hanging out around our career site that aren't actually engaging with us, kind of like zombies, right? And so we said, well, hey, that's a great topic. People love the Walking Dead show. It's hugely popular. And at the same time, all these talent acquisition HR folks want to figure out more about talent networks. So we smashed them together, pun intended, and came up with a great webinar for you today. So if you're not familiar with the Fistful of Talent webinars, we use the big orange numbers, there's big white numbers on an orange slide. So if you get completely bored, you're sitting at your desk having lunch on the West Coast, come back when you see a number change because we're going to change topics. And of course, catch us on Twitter at #SmashFly. First and foremost, Chris, we want to know, who are these zombies, right? Who are these people that are hanging around the websites? And these, the people that are lurking at your career site, but they're not actually applying. And, some of the data that we got from SmashFly said the average candidate stops by your career site at least 30 days before applying for the first time, before you have any awareness that they're actually out there. They're probably checking you out. But many obviously will never return. They don't come around again. And Chris, I know you and I have both done talent acquisition for a long time. When I first started taking a look at the numbers and seeing the amount of people that will stop by or the length of time, answer me this. I'm just going to ask you a question. It's easier.
Right.
How do you, what do you think, right, is I guess not the reason why, but why these people are coming around, hanging around, and not interacting with you and your career site?
Well, I think Tim, I think a lot of this comes down to there's this kind of buzz theme that HR people and recruiters should be more like marketers, right? And I think when people come to your career site, really what SmashFly is really all about is one of the things they're about. And certainly we should think about is converting those people, hopefully to applicants. But if you can't do applicants, if they're not ready to apply with you, hopefully you want them to take some kind of action where they want to hear from you over time. So I think the whole deal is like about converting people that hit your site. We measure it a lot of different ways at our company. We measure like total pages consumed. We measure the bounce rate after they view the first page. We measure time on site, things like that. You've got to have content. I know we're going to get into that, in the slides to come. You've got to have a compelling message. And then even if people aren't ready to apply, hopefully that content makes them interested enough where they want to take some type of action, where if they forget to come back, they automatically hear from you, right?
Yeah, no doubt. I think you had just started getting into it too, is, why do we want these zombies, right? For the most part, when you're talking about people who are hanging out at your site but not engaging with you, you're going to end up with more of a passive candidate, right? And that's one of those things that all of our hiring managers talk about. They want, even from the talent acquisition standpoint, we're all trying to figure out how do we engage this kind of passive candidate base that's out there. And, so that's ultimately what we want to try to do, is convert some of these folks in. The hard part we have, right, is when we have, and this is a great shot from a really popular episode, Chris, from The Walking Dead, is they had like these literally thousands and thousands of zombies, and they were trying to get them to go in a certain way. Okay. And so, like what you just said is, now that we have all these people around our career site, how do we get them to line up, right, and start walking in a straight line
Tim,
they're just wandering all over the place?
Tim, I can only assume that the building they're walking to is like a fake In-N-Out burger that they constructed just to make the channel that way. I don't know.
They were actually like getting him to follow them like the Pied Piper down a highway, and so they had to build up like fences and stuff. But regardless, so obviously the entire reason we're putting a webinar on is to try to teach you how you can get all these zombies to kind of fall in line and do what you want to do. A quick stat before we move on to the next section, which is 74% of applicants drop off before completing an application. And, really, do we need even another reason of why you need to have a really good engagement software, for your talent networks and for your candidates? I think most people are shocked by this from a talent acquisition standpoint. I think they always think like, oh, yeah, people come in and they apply, and we probably lose a couple. And I would guess if we went out and had people raise hands, they would be like, well, we probably lose 20%. We might lose 15%. I don't think anybody would think they lose really more than that. If they said like, hey, we lose 1 out of 4, then they might think like, oh, that's pretty good. But the reality is they're losing 3 out of 4, and to me that's a giant number.
Yeah, and Tim, I think like recruitment marketing budgets, and we'll stay vendor agnostic in terms of where you post your jobs and where you market your jobs. But the reality is we pay a lot for some of that traffic that comes to us, not all of it. And for a lot of us, not much of it is organic in nature because we're not some big brand name and we've got to fight for that traffic. And that's why it's important to convert as high a percentage as you can because it's hard to get people to your site.
Yeah, no doubt. So big number 2 coming, again, #SmashFly. On the Twitters, tell me who your favorite Walking Dead character is and why, and then tag it SmashFly so we can see it. And we'll talk about that towards the end. Chris, I'm going to let you take control and tell us what's a talent network and kind of get into that.
Yeah, so, Tim, talent network, talent community, it's kind of a buzzword at times. A lot of people talk about it, but one of the reasons, like why we wanted to do this webinar and one of the reasons we love SmashFly is the fact that they're real specific about what a talent network is. And for us, a talent network, just to be very purposeful and specific, is a company-specific opt-in network that candidates can give you their contact information in exchange for all the goodies that you'll provide them after they do that, which hopefully is news about the company. If you're really upstream, news about their functional area or career, kind of expertise. We've got some examples of that coming up, and it's really an informal contract between the company and the candidate. So they trust you enough. I think, Tim, this is the best way to put it. They trust you enough and are interested enough to give you their contact information, at least an email address. And in exchange for that, you're actually telling them that you're going to provide them something of value over time about the company, about future opportunities, and like I said, if you really get upstream, about maybe even content that's specific to the job they would want to do for your company. Tim, you've heard a lot of broader definitions of this. What do you think the confusion is when people are out there and they buzz around talent community, talent network, and they don't really know what they're talking about? What are they confused about?
I mean, I think that when you first said it, and I think both people, like you said, I think people are starting to mash these together and they think it's just the same thing. And we're going to talk about the differences a little bit, but for me, I think the confusion on the talent network, comes back to, their engagement level with it. When I seems like I sign up for a lot of things, right? When we opt into, I do a lot of, whether it's blogs or content that I'm going to get from certain technical things or whatever it might be, and I know that I don't have to do anything, right? I'm just going to click like, yep, here's my stuff. Send me all the great information you got, but don't ask me to participate. Like I just want you to shove something down my throat, right?
Sure. Well, let's talk about the difference between a talent network and a talent community, Tim. So, pretty interesting, differentiation here. So a talent community is a member community, and talent communities are always going to be based around shared or common interests. For example, we've got a lot of HR people, a lot of recruiters on this webinar, and we could have a community that included both of us. We could have separate communities for HR, separate communities for recruiting, but the key is there's two-way engagement. So that content that you talked about, Tim, is really created and shared by all. So, Tim, if you and I are part of a talent network and we opt into a specific company's talent network, the company is really responsible for creating that content. So if you go to that second group of bullet points, the talent network is designed to build talent pipelines. The engagement's really one way. So once we sign in and sign up for a talent network of a specific company, that company is responsible for broadcasting the content. And obviously, with that in mind, they have more control over what goes on in the talent network. Talent community is a different thing because content can be created by anyone there. And as a result, it gets really hard to maintain those. And as they grow, if you're fortunate enough for one of those to grow, it gets really hard to control. And Tim, I think one of the best ways I could get people's heads around talent communities is to think about something like LinkedIn groups. You can have a LinkedIn group, which is really a talent community, and you can let people and like monitor that and approve signups, but you're going to keep the community clean of vendors and people like pushing Viagra and have you've literally got to prune it every day because it's two-way engagement, whereas talent network you don't have to do that. And I think, Tim, that's one of the things you mentioned. That's where people get confused a little bit about the difference between a talent community and a talent network.
Well, and I think when we first started this out, like 5 years ago, all you heard about was talent communities. I mean, it was talent community this, everybody had to have one. And I think that started to cause some of the thing because it was part of that bringing that social part of recruiting into HR and talent acquisition on the corporate side. And I think most of those people thought, oh, the great way to socially have this is to do these talent communities. And then all of a sudden, we started to see the hickeys come out pretty quick. And like you said, you kind of talked about them, but super hard to maintain, really hard to stay active on the content. But then all of a sudden, you have people within the community sharing things that you might not want shared, especially if you have a corporate talent community. And all of a sudden, they're sharing stuff about your competitors and lose control, right? The one thing I love about the talent network side is because you do have that control, but you also have that great, kind of inline of sourcing. So
yeah, and there's never, like, you think about corporate communications, corporate marketing, they're always going to vote for a talent network over a talent community because of the control factors you just mentioned. So why do you want one over the other? I think everybody can kind of tell the way we're leaning and the way we're pushing people. Really, talent networks can be measured. Like once you get apart from the control issues, talent networks are better than talent communities because they can easily be measured, and you can directly correlate them to placements, right? People you're actually putting into open jobs. You can't do that with a community, or at least it's harder to do that. So kind of this one-way engagement, kind of you having control. Talent networks work much better just from a standpoint of measuring ROI. Now, one of the things we mentioned that 74% of potential applicants to your site, visitors to your site, looking at the career section of your site, drop off in your apply process. A couple reasons for that. Maybe your site isn't engaging to begin with. Tim, you can talk to this a little bit. I think the drop off includes people that are going through the 18 screens in your application process, right? So there's a little bit of UI design element to how long your application process is, in addition to just the look and feel of your site, correct?
Yeah, well, one of the things you and I talk about a lot, especially when we speak with like talent acquisition pros, is when's the last time they audited their own process as an applicant, right? How many times have you taken it? And not just, hey, I'm going to go to our career site on my desktop internally to my office and take it.
Right.
Go home and do it from your own computer and see if it works the same. Then get on your phone, get on your tablet, and see how that works. And then you understand why 74% of the people fall off, because usually it's a nightmare, especially when you start changing devices in terms of applying. But then also, so often, like, Chris, you and I, 5 years ago, we wanted 15 filters in our applicant process because we had so many candidates, and now, we don't want that. And I always ask somebody, is there a way for an applicant, especially like your hardest to find, and if you went to your biggest client, or I went to mine, mine's going to be technical, like IT folks, and I said, hey, here's an IT person, how do they in one click apply to your process? And they go, well, we don't have that. Well, then why? Why would they?
right? Now, talent networks, once you do that, it'll bring your drop off, it'll improve your drop off. Tim, do you want to explain the 20%?
Well, yeah. So I think what you see with a talent network, with a really good engaged talent network, is that they're going to give you those people that fell off. So even though you might not potentially even know those people, those 74% of those people who are lurking around,
right?
If the first step was, hey, just give us an email address, they're going to be able to go back and say, hey, wait a minute, you forgot something, right? Like you forgot to apply. And they have,
Right.
and SmashFly has shown some really good stats, and we're going to talk specifically about some companies and what they've been able to do, and you're going to be able to see some real numbers in a lot of different industries on how they use talent networks to bring back applicants that dropped off initially.
Tim, let's keep moving just in the
Yeah.
interest of time. In either case, whether you're doing a talent network or a talent community, if you want engagement, if you want people to spend time in your talent network, which is obviously our preference over talent community, if you want them to spend time, if you want them to open up the emails you send them, content is really key. You've got to have great content. There's a lot of different ways to do that. So Tim, if you move to the next slide for me, really developing, what we'll call a sustainable content strategy is pretty simple. The biggest thing when I give people advice from a marketing perspective and even a writing perspective, Tim, it seems like people always want to write War and Peace to start with. like they've got like some big ideas. They got big ideas, Tim.
Yeah. Hey, everyone has a manifesto, right, to start.
Right. They got the, whatever, software development manifesto, and damn it, they're going to write it. Well, the reality is, what the advice I always give people is what we have here. People love bite-sized bits of data, things like USA Today, arts and charts. Really, what I would tell you is you can interest people best, and it's the easiest on you just to think about micro niches and writing about a niche of a niche within the business that might interest a certain type of candidate. Best way to accomplish that, we do this a lot at Kinetics. Kara, who was on earlier with that great intro, told me, or she helps us do editorial calendars. So every month we kind of talk about what's coming, and we talk about that. We talk about whether it's strong enough. We talk about different types of candidates that we might be focused on. And the other thing you can do is you can find out what your own people are consuming. So whatever's getting passed around the office, whether it's a meme, like whatever you've got, like think about putting content in smaller bite sizes, because really, Tim, I always tell people in this ADHD world that we live in, there are a million things to read. So if you go with the software development manifesto, for example, people will never read that. So you've got to dumb it down a little bit. And then a great way to do that is to use apps like Feedly, Blog11, readers, so to speak, that will help you monitor a lot of sources. And some of this content you don't even have to create on your own.
Yeah, to me that's the win right there. The other thing, Chris, is I think people when they first start out with that editorial plan or a calendar, is they take too big of a bite, right, to start. Like they're like, oh, we're going to have a new piece of content every single day for the first 90 days or something, and you're like, whoa, slow down, partner, right? Like let's go out and first create 5 pieces of content and do one a week for 5 weeks and see how that starts to go and ease your way into it. You and I are pretty big content developers. We do a lot of stuff on a weekly basis, but
yeah,
we also know that that's really hard to do. Not a lot of people can do that. And so I think, like you said, you have to find ways to kind of steal content. For me, and you kind of showed me this early on in my career of blogging and writing and developing content, was people want conversation starters. They don't need a manifesto. They just need a little tidbit of a metric or something that they go, all of a sudden you find yourself in an elevator and you're like, hey, did you see blah, blah, blah,
Right.
And it's it's a little 200, 300, 400 word piece of content that they can start the conversation with.
It's a TMZ world, Tim. So you've got to give it to them the way they want it.
All right, we're moving along because we have some great things coming up. We're going to talk with Darina Adamczyk from Meyer, formerly of CH2M, and have a live kind of expert of somebody who's actually started these talent networks and had some really good experience with those. So check them out. Check us out at #SmashFly on the Twitters, and we're going to go right into how do you develop your own talent network strategy, and I got about 5 pieces of information that we're going to bust through, and keep going on that. So first and foremost, in growing your talent network, you really got to focus on how do you allow kind of this opt-in type of form strategy, right? And again, if you don't have a recruitment marketing automation, it becomes more difficult, right? So obviously using someone like SmashFly is going to make it easier. It doesn't mean you have to go out and use the software. You could probably try to figure that out. There's a lot of websites out there that can create, or your development people can create an opt-in form, within your careers page. It just becomes a little bit more difficult in terms of dealing with that. And then also you have to figure out what are the types of candidates your team, kind of will source. And then what are the expectations and the value that you provide for that network? You need to figure that out beforehand. You can't just say, hey, we're going to start collecting names and then we'll figure it out on the backside. Just take a little bit of time to say, who do we really want, and what do we really want to give them, and what do we want to get out of it? As the first steps to growing that network strategy is going to be huge. Targeting really a candidate population, again, I think would be the next step that I would go after. So once you get the candidate system, that you need in terms of the segment, now you start to look at, is there a certain job skill, job type, location, competitor? Like, how are you going to break these pools of candidates up in terms of your talent network? And really that creates, this pipelining strategy that you want and how you engage. And Chris, you and I, we've for years have talked about candidate talent pipelines and how hiring managers love to have those, or at least believe that we have those, so that when they lose somebody, you can just go, hey, grab someone from the pipeline and put them in.
Right.
To me, the talent networks are really the first kind of step to at least even coming close to that, because we know how difficult the reality is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if people hear from you and they grow to kind of know and love what's going on in your company, especially in their specific skill set, then you got a chance to get to them when you do have an opening.
Definitely. So the campaign and engagement, we talked a little bit about this in terms of the content, which is your campaign of what you're going to send out, and how you're going to engage. The last thing you want to do is become job spam. And so if you have a talent network, can you send out, if let's say you had 1,000 engineers in your talent network and you wanted to send out an announcement to say, guess what, we have this new job and this new opening. That's definitely a piece of content that you can do, but if that's all you do, it becomes spam and people are going to opt out of that network right away. So you really have to find those ways to kind of make that valuable to your talent network. And a lot of times, the other error I see, Chris, and you and I both have seen this, is when HR talent acquisition people run the talent network and they start to send out stuff that's HR and recruiting related to the people to their talent network, when none of those people they're trying to recruit engineers, or they're trying to recruit IT professionals, or finance, right, or nurses, or any of those kinds of segments, and they're sending them stuff like that's HR related. And you're like, they don't care about that stuff. Like, you have to go out and find stuff that's related to them.
Absolutely.
All right, so what about the fresh candidates, right? This is another piece of your talent network strategy, and that's how are you going to keep them fresh and meaty and tasty. I just love this picture.
That's a lot, Tim. I'll tell you that's a lot there. A lot to consider.
It's one of the biggest flaws that companies are going to make, is because they will basically not keep their data fresh. They're going to go out there, they're going to collect names in this talent pipeline, and then there's certain ones of those that they're just not going to touch again ever. And so all of a sudden you're sending this emails and this content out to try to engage with somebody, yet you've really never asked them to do anything. And so rule of thumb is, at least annually, you really want to kind of touch those people and say, hey, are you still with us? Are you still want to receive this? Do you still want to be a part of it? And have them opt in continually, to know that you have a really kind of fresh network that you're dealing with, that you're tapping on people that still have interest in engaging with you. And again, think about how people notify, their social circles of changes on Facebook and LinkedIn. They will give you some ideas on how you can go out there and really kind of interact with people. And it depends on initially how much information you gather. every day when I log onto Facebook, you see birthday notices. Now, you're probably not going to do that with a talent pipeline and ask for their birth date. But if down the road, if you're gathering information, you got to that point where you had it, that'd be a great way on their birthday, right, to send out a message and said, hey, it's your birthday, happy birthday, come back to us and let us know. And it really, again, another great recruitment automation system is going to let you know, hey, who hasn't interacted with us in a while, right? And let's go out and specifically go after those individuals. I'll get you off the zombie photo because I think it's making Chris sick.
Yeah, I gotta go. We're getting some tweets about it too. Kind of love hate tweets, by the way.
So we're going to get in specifically at the end of the webinar on really how to specifically measure for success. But initially within a strategy, right, you need to understand what the messaging and content is. And is it compelling enough that the candidate population that you're trying to connect with, are they actually going to come out and do that? So then from there, what are the metrics you're going to measure, and how are you going to track these measures? Because again, all of this can become a big nightmare if you don't have this stuff kind of defined out and understand how you're going to do it. We keep coming back to saying, hey, a nice piece of technology would really help you with this, and that's going to make it a heck of a lot easier. But the reality is you still can do this without. It's just going to make it much more difficult. So I think as part of that strategy, make sure you know what you want to measure. Make sure you know how you're going to measure. And if you don't know how to do that, then you're just going out there and emailing a bunch of people jobs, and that's not really what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And if you're going to do like a talent network, Tim, I would say you would want to report some of those metrics in the same way that a lot of us report turnover.
Yeah.
Time to fill and things like that. You'd want to take a look at it because like actually looking at the numbers is the only way to keep yourself honest and see if some type of action is actually required to keep your talent network viable. All right, orange screen. I'm going to take it. Tim, you ready? Let's do this. So orange screen, go back to the orange screen, Tim, right? Orange screen means, hey, if you were drifting away, if you're doing email, come back. Tim's done for a couple minutes. Now it's me. Hey, you're on a Fistful of Talent webinar. We're all about zombies today and converting zombies to candidates via talent networks. Hashtag on Twitter, SmashFly. Pretty active over there, Tim, so while I'm doing this, you ought to go take a look. So I'm going to move through this one pretty quick. We've got 5 ways that companies are utilizing talent networks to actually transform zombies to real employees. I memorized it, Tim. I could actually do that. So here's how this is going to go, folks. I'm going to give you 5 different companies, and I'm going to give you, they're doing a lot of things well, but we're going to give you one high-level note of what we really like related to what they're doing with talent networks. Just one thing, tell you why it's important, bring Tim in for a little color commentary, then we're going to move on so we can move through these 5 and get our guest in that will have more real-life experience with talent networks. So the first one's the Washington Post. I love this one, Tim, when we kind of dug into it. So how the Washington Post is using, by the way, one of my favorite papers, I think Fair and Balanced, how they're using talent networks is to really deal with the challenge in the second bullet point. How do we engage freelance writers at a moment's notice? So obviously they've got a huge contract workforce, and one of their answers was to create their own talent network and networks, plural, between editors and writers. So whatever the specialty, whatever the geography, they've got a mechanism now where editors can really call out to the talent network and get commentary on what's going on, and also engage with contractors to actually do work for the Washington Post, which creates, Tim, if you will, really kind of a just-in-time workforce.
Well, yeah, Chris, and I know, we take a look at it and say, well, this is freelance writers, and that's really, God, it's such a narrow kind of thing that they're dealing with. How, as a talent acquisition person, how do I deal with it? My own team does this exact same thing for some clients with skilled trades. So we have some just-in-time, because we do a lot of work with build shops, right? So they have these short-term, really huge bubbles of work, and they'll need machine builders, they'll need pipe fitters, they need different skilled trades. And we do the exact same thing. We're just not dealing with writers, we're dealing with skilled trades folks.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the one thing for the Washington Post, obviously doing a lot of other things well. Next up, we've got Eaton Corporation. Big company capturing 1,000 contacts per day. on the talent network. So obviously they've got their game together doing that. One of the things that makes Eaton unique and something they do very well, obviously, or in addition to just like capturing a bunch of contacts into their talent network, is the challenge was, how do we build pipelines of talent around major hiring areas? And I think once you get started building a talent network, this is a question that all of you are going to come to. So what Eaton did was they built 23, and I'm going to come back to that number in a second. They built 23 talent networks around core disciplines, each with separate relevant messaging and content. Now, what I would say, kind of the Festivus for the rest of us, Eaton obviously is into this and has done very, very well. I think for most of us, Tim, we're going to ask ourselves the question, where are my top 2 or 3 areas of recruiting pain? Yeah. And how can I use the talent network to help me aggregate future candidates for that and stay in touch with them? So Tim, would you agree? Love the fact that Eaton's done it 23 different ways. I think for most of us, it's what's my 2 or 3 biggest areas of pain, correct?
No, yeah, and again, as if you're just starting out, start with one, right? You always have some either department or location or hiring manager who's just beating you up to find talent. Start with one, try it, see what happens.
Absolutely. Next up, we've got CDW, Charles Barkley. Love the ads. I can see Charles as an IT professional. I really can. So really the story behind CDW and Talent Networks is they had really some growth initiatives, and in order to help supply kind of the applicant demand that they needed, they really went with a content strategy. They used employee stories. They did a really good job with thank you messages and recruiter outreach through email, which, by the way, both of those are content pieces. Doing thank you messages, either in your ATS or with the Talent Network, content, doing emails that help recruiters do quality outreach, content, and then they used automated touch points to both deliver those and keep the pipelines fresh. Also, one interesting thing here, Tim, is they also used their Glassdoor rating, pre and post apply, to convert more leads. So I'm assuming they've got a positive Glassdoor rating, and by sharing that, they found that they were able to convert more leads off their website straight into their talent network. Because let's face it, if you see a 4.1 on Glassdoor, you're probably going to react in a more positive fashion to somebody that says, hey, you're special. We'd love for you to join our talent network.
Yeah.
All right, next up. By the way, this is a little Sackett. That's a little Sackett. I recognize little Sackett.
My youngest son, he's now much older than this, so he would kill me if he knew I put his picture on here, but he's eating sweet potato fries at Cheesecake Factory in Raleigh, North Carolina, waiting for Lori Rudiman to show up when we were there a couple years back.
It looks like he hasn't been fed for like 3 days in that picture, by the way, Tim. Kim Sackett will be proud of me that I said that. All right, Cheesecake Factory on Talent Networks. Let's get away from the Sackett family for a second, although it's kind of like zombies. It's in our face until I get off this slide. What the Cheesecake Factory did is something really smart. So now we're talking kind of just basic mechanics for your talent network. And some of you would do talent networks and you wouldn't think of this. So you want to do all the mechanical kind of transactional pieces right. So what they did is they added their talent network opt-in as part of their application flow. So they're going through the application, talent network opt-in is in that. By the way, Tim, I would always check that box yes, and make people uncheck it no. Yeah. I'm sure SmashFly can give us the best practice on that. That's the Chris Dunn practice, where I'm going to assume you want to be in. You're going to have to unclick it in order for me not to make you part of our talent network. And they captured the email address as the first step before they applied. So they made sure that they had what they needed to add people to the talent network. And by the way, people like Eaton that are converting 1,000 contacts per day into their talent network, there's probably no way to do that unless you automate the opt-in process into the talent network. So you definitely want to do that. Did the auto reminder to make sure people understood that they got added. So then when they get the first piece of content, Tim, they're not surprised. They said, oh yeah, I did apply for that. I did like opt into that. The result was they were able to attribute 182 hires from 1,000 candidates who never completed the apply process. So Tim, they were able to go back out to those candidates, re-engage them, and convert them not only into candidates, but into hires, right?
Right. No, I think it's one of the great things that we see, you know, when we talk about all those people those 74% of candidates that don't finish. That's a great stat right there from Cheesecake saying, hey, here's how you reach out, you know, to all those people after they kind of got tired of going through your process, and you kind of said, hey, come back, we love you, you know, and they came back.
Speaking of coming back, Tim, CH2M did a great job. So there's a little nugget in each one of these. Tim, I like saying nugget. You like the way I say that?
Yeah.
There's a little nugget in each one of these, Tim. And CH2M, the nugget, among many things they've done right with Talent Networks, is they invited previous applicants to join. Seems obvious, but you've got this big database of candidates in your ATS, and a great way to get flow back into your talent network is just to go through there. Maybe you've got it divided, good candidate, bad candidate. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just focus on certain skill sets and former applicants to certain jobs, but you want to invite all those people to join, and then you get your recruiters engaged in the process. You add the opt-in form to your apply flow, and the result of that for CH2M, they were able to get 300,000 in their talent network, 300,000 like members of their talent network in the first 2 years. And I would tell you, Tim, that's not possible unless you, A, either have a lot of traffic to your career site, so you're automatically opting in, which they did, and you also go through your ATS and you invite all of those people to join you. And remember, basic tenet of marketing, people don't get the message sometimes until you hit them 7 times. So I would tell you the email marketer in me says that you would want to hit those people multiple times, like 3, 4 times, and don't assume just because they didn't apply to the first one that you can't convert them.
Yeah, to me, Chris, this really speaks to the gold mine that you have within your own ATS database, but you're unable to really go out and be able to kind of mine all that. Right. With a great talent network, you can really take advantage of it. So definitely. All right, this is the highlight of the show. Well, besides Chris showing up and being a part of this. Number 5, and of course, catch us on SmashFly. It's a funny Twitter feed right now at #SmashFly. With some of the jokes and stuff on all of that. We're going to bring in our Ask the Expert, which is Darina Adamczyk, and she is currently the TA manager of Meyer, and I'll explain what that is, because formerly she was a global recruitment marketing manager for CH2M, which we had just talked about. They're a SmashFly client. They do engineering consulting work. Darina, are you out there?
Hey, Tim, I'm here.
Cool. So I want to explain, because a lot of people don't know what Meyer is. You and I do, because we're both in Michigan. For everybody that doesn't know, think of Super Target, think of Walmart Supercenters. Meyer was all of that before those guys got into it. In fact, at one point, Target tried to buy Meyer for like $1 billion plus, and Meyer turned him down because it's a great company based right out of here in Michigan, and now you're running TA for them. And obviously a recruiting marketing expert. You're also a Rollins College alum, so I'm going to ask you and KD, do you guys know, well, Katie probably, you guys see it on the record, who's the most famous alum from Rollins College?
Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Rogers. Fred Rogers.
I did not know that.
Isn't
I
that
did not
awesome?
know that.
I love that.
We were also rated some year, like Playboy's, like best college for partying as well, but people may not talk about that.
Well, yeah, we're a family show here, Doreen. I can't believe you just brought that up. I mean, that's so like zombies eating people, but we can't talk about the party schools.
Yeah.
So hey, we were going to go back a little bit and talk about your experience with CH2M and really talk about your transition from going kind of what I would say is analog recruitment into digital kind of recruitment marketing automation. Talk to us about that transition, how you did it, why you did it, all of that.
Yeah, and I really want to say that it is a journey. We started working with SmashFly in 2011, but some of the things that you talked about as far as transitions really didn't happen until last year. So if I give you the backstory, we started with a talent network on our career site, and it was on our Facebook page. And by the end of 2012, we only had 10,000 contacts, and I'll call that our dead strategy. there is initially a lot more work involved to cultivate a talent network. It's not a if you build it, they will come kind of thing. So in 2013, we started to invite the prospective candidates from our recruiters and our sourcers, as well as the previous applicants, like you mentioned. And by 2014, we were up to 90,000 contacts. And that's pretty great, but our recruiters didn't have time to send their hot candidates, and only inviting silver medalists to join the talent network really wasn't enough to create an ROI.
Yeah.
So last year I worked with a lot of other SmashFly customers, so what's best practice, and we added our talent network as an optional form in the apply process. And in 1 year, we grew from 90,000 contacts to more than 300,000 people who had opted in, and they were global. We inserted that form between the job ad and the ATS login screen. And I think adding an opt-in form during the apply process is one of the most successful marketing turned recruitment tactics we implemented.
Because probably a lot of people will go, they're going to go to your career site. They're going to see, oh my gosh, I'm interested in that job. And then you have that little apply button, right? And they click on that, and then they see the 14,000 step apply process, and they just jet out. But if the next screen is just, hey, give us your email address, they think, oh, that's easy, right? And they give you the email address, and now you're cooking with gas.
Yeah, exactly. And you talked about the drop off in the apply process. We saw that as well. When we turned on the feature that Cheesecake Factory also used, we saw in 3 months that we had 20,000 people who started but didn't complete the application. So that's a lot of people. If you put that talent network form in front of the application, you can message those people and invite them to come back and finish their app. So what we did is we had an automated workflow in SmashFly, and it triggered after 72 hours, and it would invite people to come back and finish. And with that, we were able to recapture people and get to that 20% drop-off that you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, and to me, I think that it's one of those things where without that automation, like you just lost, literally hundreds, thousands of potential candidates that you just never can get back.
Exactly.
And like so many of us are begging, for talent, and it's right there, but we just don't have a way to engage it.
Yeah, exactly.
So give me, what other advice do you have for, everyone listening in terms of they want to make this move, they want to start doing some of this stuff. Like if now that you've been through it once, and I know that you're trying to do a similar thing at Meyer, so what have you learned, that you can share with us?
Yeah, exactly. Well, in the beginning, you talked about like tackling the lurking and the leaving, and I'm trying to bring back The Walking Dead, but I'm sorry, I don't watch the show. It's too gory for me. But in 2012, we saw that we had 90% drop off. So people would come to the site and look at a position, but they wouldn't apply. So we also saw that majority of our traffic came to the career site from Google, Indeed, or LinkedIn, and people would land on a specific job, and that would be their first impression of the company. In a traditional career site, the candidate will look at the posting and they'll decide yes or no, are they going to apply for that? Because that's the only options we presented to them. And if their choice was no, they closed the browser, they went back to Google or Indeed. And so at CH2M, the goal was to keep those prospects from going away. We wanted to keep them in the recruiting funnel. So in the middle of the job postings on our career site, we've got a call to action that says not a match for you, search again, or create a job alert to be notified when jobs that match your criteria are posted. And so for us, that job alert is the first step into the talent network, and we collect a really minimal amount of information to prevent drop-off. And that's how we capture contact information for people who just aren't quite ready to apply or they didn't see the right position for them.
So I love the job alert analogy, because how many, would you say, like, how many of those did you see that got set up? Like, do you have a number, or do you have a ballpark on? Because I think people are always shocked. When I see the numbers of job alerts, I'm always shocked at how high those numbers are, that people actually want to set those up.
Yeah, I don't know where CH is at today, but we looked at the first 60 days, and within 2 months, we had 12 people who were hired or at offer process, and job alert was one of the sources.
That's insane. Yeah, to me, it just shows like how, people actually, there's probably a ton of people, it's one of those things that we think of as TA managers, is that we go, hey, there's probably a lot of people out in our communities that want to come work for our company, but we just don't have the opening now. But we think that they're always going to come back and check all the time, and they don't. And so if you don't have that job alert option, you're probably going to miss them. The time that you do have the opening, somebody else is going to get it, and you just missed out on probably a better talent.
Yep, exactly. So it was one of the things that we had the highest sense of urgency of implementing with SmashFly because we could see the value. We've created somebody at SmashFly called it a walled garden. And so once we've attracted this person to sign up and join our talent network, we don't have to go out and like spend money again on another job board or another site to recruit them. We've captured their information and we're staying in front of them. So it essentially does make your recruitment marketing budget last longer or go further.
So I know you had mentioned something earlier, and I know a lot of people, and this is going to seem very elementary to you, but I think there's a lot of people on the call that probably are really kind of asking themselves, how did you know that a candidate came from Indeed or Google, or how they found you? Was that through SmashFly? Was that through something else you did? Because I think a lot of people are struggling with that right now, and it seems very basic to you and I because we deal with all the technology. But for them, not having the technology, they're kind of lost in the dark right now.
Yeah, the way I learned about it was through Google Analytics. Mm-hmm. We've got our site set up on there, and I can see under acquisitions where were the referring sites. And I'm able to see that Google Search, Indeed, and LinkedIn are the top 3 for us.
No, it's great, and it's a great insight. I think for those who are listening, if you don't want to do it yourself, engage somebody on your IT team to help you go out there and set up your career site in Google Analytics so you can measure that information, because it is great data to come back to, and you do understand. Then you'll all of a sudden now you'll be down the SEO rabbit hole, but it's a fun time it's a fun way to kind of get into it and play around. Hey, KD, I want to bring you back in. Do you have any questions for Dorina before we let her go?
No, I don't really. Dorina, like any other like big ideas on little pieces of content? You talked about job alerts being key. Any other ideas about little pieces of content that you guys have experimented with that got a lot bigger results than you might have thought? Anything else out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So a key part of our candidate engagement strategy for the Talent Network is a monthly candidate newsletter. And what makes the newsletter successful is it focuses on the people, the projects, and the culture stories relevant to the audience, which for CH2M are engineers. So it's 3 short snippets, and then the links to the full articles are back on the CH2M's website, i.e. we're driving people back to the site. But the newsletter is not a list of job postings. And for one newsletter, we typically get a 51% open rate.
Right.
And that's just unheard of in any sort of marketing newsletter. So there's definitely appetite from candidates to receive information from employers. With this newsletter, we usually get a 16% click-through rate, and the average newsletter nets us about 600 applicants, and we do that once a month.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. How do you decide? I mean, you go out to everybody in the job now or the talent network for that. Do you segment it by different functional areas? What's your strategy there?
Yeah, well, that's why I think it's still a journey for CH2M because we have 30 critical skills, but we don't have the manpower, budget, resources, whatever to write 30 newsletters. We're not at Eaton, I guess. So we have been trying to write a one-size-fits-all, so it's pretty generic around people and stories. We started doing it ourselves in-house in 2011 once we saw the amount of time it took, but also the number of applications it generated. That gave us the ROI to work with our recruitment marketing agency to develop that newsletter with us.
And one of the things I love about that is you've already got the talent network set up. So I would tell you that, I work for a recruiting firm, and we've helped people do those types of newsletters, but we've just tried to segment candidates out of an ATS without going through that filter of somebody joining a talent network, and I'm sure that makes a big difference. So, Tim, unless you got anything else, I'll let you come in and say goodbye. But I've got one. I got one big idea for you, Dorina. You ready?
Yep.
So, from a content perspective, here's my big idea. What if people always love to get something exclusive, right? What if you sent jobs out to the talent network one day before the rest of the world saw them, and you marketed them like that?
I think that's some cool branding ideas. She's writing it down. She loves it.
I know. Did you hear click, click, click? No, I'm typing.
No, I was just listening to you talk earlier and thinking about content, and I was thinking, okay, if you could get around any kind of like posting policy you have, like that kind of exclusivity, people love that, whether it's real, and it would be real, but whether there's that much value or not, it's just a good way to get people to click through. And if you gave them some kind of like streamline like entry into the process, that would be cool too.
Yeah, I think it would be a logistics things to work out with SmashFly, because the way that SmashFly knows about the jobs is to get posted to the external portal,
the RSS,
gateway.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, so logistics, but that is an interesting concept.
Okay, that's I'm good for one big idea a month.
I know, I love
so
that.
That's mine.
So, Doreen, I know we talked a lot about the CH2M, and you're currently at Meyer, and so I'm looking forward to see what you can do there. And I don't know if you have gotten SmashFly there or not, but if you put in the offer code Tim Loves Zombies, I think you get 10% off this month only. Don't do that. I don't think they'll give you 10%. They'll probably charge me. But, anyway, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. We're going to get pushing along for the last two segments. Number 6, and again, catch us on hashtag SmashFly, hashtag Tim Loves Zombies for another 10% off deal. And so I have this next one. It's going to be really quick. And this is kind of goes along with a big idea that Chris just had. And I'm going to give you another big idea, and it's not going to be, you can read through numbers 1 and 2. To me, it's like what Chris just said, which is how do you make those individuals feel special? Now, his idea was, hey, I'm going to give the jobs the day before. I actually ran into a couple of companies recently who were actually those people who opted in, and they were very specific in their talent network of who they wanted in terms of a specialized IT function. They actually gave the cell phone number of the hiring manager to those individuals who opt in. And the hiring manager would actually get text and phone calls directly from that. And again, very specialized, so there wasn't like they were getting 100 people a day. They were lucky to get a couple a week if they could, and they wanted to make sure those people had direct access to a real person, made them feel special, and the hiring manager was like, look, I'll talk to anybody in this segment who wants to work here. Go ahead and put my number out there. And they've had phenomenal success because once one real developer found out that it was a real hiring manager, he shared it with like his buddy who shared it with his buddy that said, hey, you can actually talk to the real hiring manager at this company. Here's their number. And they've had great success with it.
I like it.
Yeah, so cool. Chris, I'm going to let you take on the measuring side so that we get out of here in time and have some time for some questions.
Yeah, I'll do it quick. When you think about measuring the success of talent networks, pretty easy. You've got to collect data, and preferably data that matters. So a couple things that are there. You've got general views. So that'll tell you in a general way how candidates are reacting to your brand. You've got call to action clicks. What are you asking the candidate to do? What are they doing? You heard Doreen talk about click-through rates, stuff like that. A lot of this is you as a recruiter, recruiting leader, and HR leader becoming more of a marketer. You want to monitor your opt-outs. You know, if you missed it with a certain piece of content or you walked over the line a little bit, a spike in opt-outs is going to help you understand that you stepped over the line a little bit and you really didn't hit the target. So you want to monitor that one. And then, you know, phone calls, applications, stuff like that. You want to attribute activity that really matters, that is the lifeblood of a talent acquisition function. So you want to collect all that data, but at the end of the day, all the numbers in the world won't help you unless you really get some quality out of this. You know, another way to measure is you want to talk about qualified candidates. How do you define that? Well, certainly you could define it after an interview or once they reach a certain point in your process. For example, if you submitted them to a hiring manager as a recruiter, that might be your true quality scale. I like, just off the top of my head, kind of like the interview side. I think if you cared enough about them on paper to interview, you kind of predetermine that they had a certain level of quality, so I love that one. And then obviously quality is always about getting hires. So what sources are your hires coming from, and does that match up with all the effort you're putting into the talent network? So what I would tell you, Tim, great thing to do is to make your talent network a source of hire that you match up against the different job boards, LinkedIn, Indeed, whatever. Use your talent network and start reporting on how many hires you actually get from that, right?
Yeah.
And then the last thing I think that we want to talk a little bit about is just tracking candidates. There's some technology embedded in this, and people like SmashFly can help you do it in a very smart, efficient way. But you want to think about source code tracking. You want to know, like when somebody hits your ATS, since you've spent time with custom source codes, that allows you to know exactly where someone comes from. And I got to tell you, like we work with a lot of different companies from a recruiting perspective, and it's a nightmare out there in terms of source of hire data in ATSs. So if you're relying on your recruiters to do that, I'm telling you, at least half the time, they won't do it.
Yep.
And I won't judge. I won't say lazy. Those are busy, talented people, and that's the last thing on their list. So using good technology to help you do that is really, really good. And then, you think about side-to-side tracking. Candidates find you on a job board, but then they apply to your career site. What's the real source? Another reason you need source codes, because career site is one of the most overstated sources of hire in America, Tim, if not the world. Yeah. And it's because the candidates, who are very intelligent, I got to say that, but they find themselves on the career site and they come to your drop-down menu with 40 different sources of hire.
Yeah.
And they say, God, I can't remember where I saw this job. I've looked at 16 jobs today. And they say, well, I'm here on the career site, so I must have found it via the career site. Generally speaking, nothing could be further than the truth. Just another reason to think about quality partners like SmashFly.
No, and I think, Chris, it's funny because I always do this with my own team too, because we do the same thing with our ATS, and the data sometimes isn't as clean as you'd like it. And so I'll also go out with all of our tools that we have and say, now you got to rank the tools 1 to 20 or whatever we use. Right. And it's always amazing to me because the number one rated tool by the recruiters better be the number one rated source, right? Right. Otherwise, we have some misalignment of funds and what we're doing. And I'm always surprised to see that. Sometimes that always doesn't line up to each other.
Sure. I'm with you.
So we have some time for some questions. So we definitely hit us at hashtag SmashFly, or you can actually put the question right in through the webinar. And so make sure if you have any, we'll bring Kara back in here. And we want to make sure also that the folks at SmashFly have 2 good links right there that you can get on to smashfly.com/resources. They have some great things to help you kind of develop your own talent networks and really kind of move your way into that recruitment automation. And then their blog.smashfly.com is another great resource where they have some really, really good information for both of those things. So check those out. Kara, where are we at on the questions?
Yeah, got a couple coming in on the back end here. Josh Rector asks, what are some creative names companies have used to brand their network besides calling it just a talent network?
Yeah, talent network can sound a little lame, Josh. I agree. What do you think, Tim? Josh, I think this is a focus group in your company, but I'm sure we can come up with a couple of good ones. What do you got, Tim?
Well, no, I mean, the one thing I'll say is before you start going down this path of coming up with some crazy name, I think you got to make sure people understand what the heck it is. So you can't go too far off the deep end. But I think you have to take a look at your brand. Like we even started taking a look at how we were going to brand SmashFly on Fistful of Talent in terms of like their video cast and some stuff. And we came up with a million funny ideas. But at the end, it's how does that leverage the brand and how does that leverage everything so people know what it is.
Josh, I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to zig. I'm going to say go with the vanity play. Go with something like the Smart People Network or the Beautiful People Network.
The Beautiful People. Yeah, try to find a pop culture reference that most people would get or.
Hey, on a serious note, I think like if you could do something culturally that everybody in your company would recognize and people externally could view it as still talent network centric, I think that's the best of both worlds.
Cool. Awesome. Also, I have a question. Gentry asked if Dorina would be willing to share what ATS she uses.
Dorina, are you still on?
Dorina might be.
Hey, I'm still here.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm here.
What ATS did you guys use at CH2M, and then what do you use now at Meyer?
We were hardcore brass ring for 10 years at CH2M. In September, we switched to Taleo Enterprise Edition.
Okay. And what are you using now?
At Meyer, it's Taleo as well.
Okay. So big Taleo shop.
Cool.
Yeah. SmashFly is pretty agnostic. Most people who work at SmashFly came from those 2 companies. So I got a lot of good support trying to understand ATS as well as recruitment marketing platform and putting them together.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question we have is, we talked about the job opt-in as a first step in starting your talent network, but when you're thinking about creating a talent network as a whole, what is the very first thing you need to do first to get going? Scratch. From scratch.
From scratch, the very first thing you need to get going
Yes.
is you have to have a way to collect data, off your career site. I think it has to be the exact first thing that you have to know. I mean, because you can have content strategies and you can have all these great ideas and you can know what candidates you want to go after, but the reality is if you don't have a way to collect that data, then there's no way to to kind of leverage that data down the road.
I agree with Tim Sackett. It's all about marketing automation or candidate automation. You got to have something that allows you to get opt-ins. I think opt-ins are the biggest thing in this.
Cool. Great. And I'm going to go ahead and throw out one more question here, and then we can kind of wrap it up. Because I think we've covered everybody's questions on the back end. But we talked about job alerts and monthly candidate newsletter. What other types of content could you send your talent network, and who creates that content?
So there's a number of people can create it. You could have, let's say you have a certain department that you want to have a talent network for. Maybe that's IT, maybe that's finance, wherever, sales, nursing. You can have individuals within there who have that kind of passion around developing content, or they're big consumers of content within that functional area, so they can help share that as well. Most of the time it's going to fall right back on the individuals within recruitment to kind of develop that. So that's probably the most difficult piece sometimes, because people aren't naturally content developers. You can also actually engage with companies. I know SmashFly will actually develop the content for you. There's a number of other companies out there that will do it as well. And then the kinds of stuff, like I said, it's stuff that has to be specifically related to them. When I was in the hospital side, we would share content with nurses, and we would talk about different specialties within nursing and new techniques that maybe we saw somebody at Mayo tried, and they wrote up a study, and we just wanted to share the high level side of that, so that the nurses kind of knew what was out there, what was relevant, and then they could click through if they wanted more information, as an example.
Great. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
I can't add anything, Kara, other than to say a big part of your job at Kinetics is content strategies. So it's clucas@kineticshr.com for all your questions on that.
Oh boy, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up on that note. Thanks, Chris. If you guys want to get in touch with Tim or Chris, their contact info is up on the screen. These slides will be sent out to you by Friday of this week with that same information on them. So you'll be getting these slides straight to your inbox if you register for this webinar. Thanks again to SmashFly for sponsoring the show. Again, if you're interested in learning more about them, visit the Resource Center at www.smashfly.com/resources, or their blog at blog.smashfly.com. All right, that's it for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You'll get these slides to your inbox on Friday, and have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Serena.
All right, see you guys.
See ya.
Thanks, bye.